The Galactic Council chambers had never been so quiet. 27 different species sat in their assigned seats, all eyes focused on the massive holographic display that dominated the center of the room. The display showed a real-time feed from the outer rim of the galaxy, where something impossible was happening. Ambassador Zektar of the Vraxian Empire adjusted his breathing apparatus nervously. His people had ruled this sector for over 3,000 years, and, in all that time, they had never seen anything like what was unfolding before them. The humans, those strange bipedal creatures who had only recently joined the galactic community, were doing something that defied every law of warfare the Council had established. Counselor Thane, Zektar called out to the elderly Altuiran who served as the Council's military advisor. "Are we certain these readings are accurate?" Thane's 6 eyes blinked in sequence as he checked his datapad once more. "The sensors are functioning perfectly, Ambassador. What we're seeing is real." His voice carried a tremor that hadn't been there in decades of service. The display showed a massive Korthak invasion fleet, easily 10,000 ships strong, bearing down on the small human colony of New Terra. The Korthak were known throughout the galaxy as unstoppable raiders. Their ships were built for destruction, their warriors bred for killing, and their tactics had never failed in over 500 years of conquest. But something was wrong with this picture. The human response fleet was tiny by comparison. Maybe 800 ships at most, and many of them appeared to be converted civilian vessels. Standard galactic doctrine would have called for immediate evacuation. Any reasonable species would have fled or surrendered. The Korthak had given them the traditional ultimatum just hours before: surrender and become slaves, or face complete annihilation. The humans had sent back a single-word response: no. Now, as the Council watched in real time, they were about to witness what that simple word truly meant. "Contact the human delegation," ordered High Counselor Meridia, her crystalline form shifting colors as stress affected her molecular structure. "They need to understand what they're facing. The Korthak have destroyed civilizations 100 times older than theirs." Ambassador Sarah Chen, the human representative, stood up from her seat in the observer section. She was young by galactic standards, maybe 40 standard years, with the kind of calm demeanor that had initially made other species underestimate her entire race. "High Counselor, with respect, we know exactly what we're facing. Then, why haven't you evacuated?" The question came from Commander Brix of the Theshan Navy, his mandibles clicking with anxiety. "Our calculations show that even if every ship in your fleet performed at maximum efficiency, you'd lose this engagement within 6 hours. The casualty rate would be 98%. Sarah's expression didn't change. "Commander, your calculations are based on standard galactic warfare protocols. You're assuming we'll fight like you do. There are only so many ways to conduct space combat," Zektar interjected. "Energy weapons, kinetic bombardment, electronic warfare. The Korthak have mastered them all. They've never lost a major engagement." "That's because they've never fought humans before," Sarah replied simply. The display suddenly flared with activity. The Korthak fleet had reached the edge of the New Terra system and was beginning their standard intimidation formation. Massive dreadnoughts moved into position while smaller ships spread out in a classic encirclement pattern. It was textbook Korthak strategy, proven effective against dozens of species. The human fleet's response was anything but textbook. Instead of forming defensive lines or attempting to match the Korthak formation, the human ships scattered. To most observers, it looked like panic. Ships broke formation and headed in seemingly random directions. Some appeared to be fleeing toward the outer system, while others dove straight toward the star. "What are they doing?" whispered Counselor Yava of the Delian Republic. Her feathered crest was fully extended in confusion. "It looks like they're running," Thane observed grimly. "Perhaps they've realized the hopelessness of their situation." Saracen smiled, and several council members later said that smile had sent chills down their spines, even though most of them were cold-blooded to begin with. "They're not running," she said quietly. "They're hunting." The word hung in the air like a physical presence. In all the galaxy's recorded history, warfare had been about formations, honor, and established tactics. The concept of hunting in space combat was alien to civilized species. On the display, the Korthak fleet commander was apparently as confused as the council. His ships hesitated, unsure whether to pursue the scattered human vessels or proceed with the bombardment of New Terra. In that moment of uncertainty, the real fight began. The human ship that had been diving toward the star suddenly changed course. Its engines, which should have been overheating from the proximity to solar radiation, instead flared with increased power. The ship emerged from behind a solar flare like a predator emerging from tall grass, moving faster than should have been possible. "How are they maintaining that velocity?" Commander Brix asked, his voice tight with disbelief. "Their engines should have failed by now." The answer became clear as the human ship opened fire. But these weren't standard energy weapons or kinetic projectiles. The weapons seemed to adapt and change with each shot, as if the humans were learning from each exchange and modifying their approach in real time. "Impossible," breathed Zektar. "Weapon systems can't be reconfigured that quickly. It takes hours to adjust targeting parameters." "Not if you design them to adapt from the beginning," Sarah said. "Human ships aren't built around single-purpose weapons systems. They're built around adaptive warfare platforms." More human ships began their attacks, and a pattern emerged that chilled the council to their cores. Each ship didn't just attack, it stalked. They used asteroid fields, debris clouds, and even the gravitational effects of planets to mask their approach. When they struck, they hit weak points that shouldn't have been detectable to anyone outside the Korthak military. "How do they know where to target?" Thane demanded. "Those ships are using classified Korthak technical specifications. There's no way they could have that information." Sarah's smile grew wider. "Counselor, you're thinking like prey. When a predator hunts, it doesn't need to know the technical specifications of its target. It observes. It learns. It adapts." As if to prove her point, a group of human vessels that had appeared to be fleeing suddenly reversed course and attacked from an angle the Korthak had left completely undefended. The lead human ship, a converted cargo hauler that looked like it had no business in a combat zone, somehow slipped through the Korthak's shields and delivered a precision strike that disabled a ship 10 times its size. "This is barbaric," Counselor Yava said, her voice filled with horror. "They're not following any established rules of engagement." "The Korthak don't follow rules either," Sarah pointed out. "They rape, pillage, and enslave. They've been doing it for centuries while the Council watched and did nothing because they were following established warfare protocols. Maybe it's time for a different approach." The battle was escalating rapidly, but not in the way anyone had expected. The Korthak fleet, which had started the engagement with overwhelming numerical superiority, was beginning to show signs of confusion and disarray. Their rigid tactical formations, which had served them well against civilized opponents, were proving useless against an enemy that refused to fight by the rules. Human ships appeared and disappeared like ghosts. They used everything in the system as a weapon, redirecting asteroids into collision courses, using gravitational slingshots to achieve impossible velocities, even triggering solar flares to disable enemy sensors. It was warfare unlike anything the galaxy had ever seen. "They're not just fighting," Zektar realized, his voice filled with a mixture of awe and terror. "They're improvising. Every attack is different from the last." Human military doctrine is built around the concept of adaptive strategy, Sarah explained, though her eyes never left the display. "We don't believe in fixed battle plans because we learned long ago that the enemy gets a vote in how the fight goes. So we prepare for anything and everything." A Korthak dreadnought, one of their most powerful ships, suddenly found itself surrounded by a dozen human vessels that had seemed to materialize from empty space. The human ships moved in perfect coordination, but not like a formation. More like a pack. "Watch this," Sarah said softly. The human ships didn't concentrate their fire on the dreadnought's shields or weapons systems. Instead, they targeted specific points along the hull in a seemingly random pattern. Only after several minutes did the pattern become clear to the watching council members. "They're not trying to destroy it," Thane whispered in horror. "They're trying to cripple it." The dreadnought's engines flickered and died. Its weapons fell silent. Its life support systems began to fail in a cascade of carefully orchestrated system failures. The ship was still intact, but it was completely helpless. "The crew is still alive," Commander Brix noted, checking his readings. "Why didn't they destroy the ship completely?" Sarah's expression had gone cold. "Because destruction is quick. What they're doing now. This is going to take much longer." The implications hit the council like a physical blow. The humans weren't just defeating the Korthak fleet. They were making examples of them. The crippled dreadnought would drift helplessly while its crew slowly realized their situation. Other Korthak ships would see what had happened and understand that the same fate awaited them. It was psychological warfare on a scale that the civilized galaxy had never imagined. "This changes everything," High Counselor Meridia said, her crystalline form shifting through a spectrum of colors that indicated deep distress. "If humans can do this to the Korthak, what does that mean for the rest of us?" Sarah turned to face the council directly. "It means that for the first time in 500 years, raiders and slavers are going to think twice before attacking innocent colonies. It means that the galaxy might finally have defenders who are willing to do whatever it takes to protect the weak." "But the cost," Counselor Yaba protested. "This kind of warfare, it's so brutal." "More brutal than what the Korthak have been doing?" Sarah's voice carried an edge now. "More brutal than the slave markets on Zirian Prime? More brutal than the mining worlds where captured civilians work themselves to death in Korthak labor camps?" The council fell silent. They all knew about those atrocities, but discussing them was considered impolite in civilized discourse. On the display, more Korthak ships were falling victim to human tactics. A squadron of destroyers found themselves trapped in a clever gravitational snare that used the system's own moons as anchor points. Another group of raiders discovered too late that what they thought was a fleeing merchant vessel was actually packed with enough explosives to level a small city. "How long have you been planning this?" Zektar asked quietly. "We haven't been," Sarah replied. "That's what you don't understand. This isn't a plan. This is just what happens when you threaten something humans care about. We adapt. We improvise. We find a way." The Korthak fleet commander was apparently reaching the same conclusion. His ships began to retreat, but the human pursuit was relentless. This wasn't a rout or a withdrawal, it was a hunt, and the humans were patient predators. "They're not going to let any of them escape," Thane observed with growing alarm. "Would you?" Sarah asked. "If someone came to your home, threatened your family, and promised to enslave everyone you cared about, would you let them retreat so they could try again later?" The logic was simple and terrifying in its clarity. The humans weren't fighting a battle, they were solving a problem. And their solution was to ensure that the Korthak threat was permanently eliminated. As the first part of what would later be called the New Terra incident drew to a close, the Galactic Council sat in stunned silence. They had invited humanity into their community thinking they were welcoming another civilized species. Instead, they had just witnessed the unleashing of something that had been dormant in the galaxy for millions of years. The humans were predators. And they had just announced their presence to the entire galaxy. The display continued to show the ongoing hunt as human ships pursued fleeing Korthak vessels into the darkness between stars. Each pursuing ship moved with purpose and patience, like hunters who knew their prey couldn't escape forever. Sarah Chen remained standing, her eyes fixed on the display, her expression unreadable. Around her, the representatives of 26 other species tried to process what they had just witnessed. The galaxy had changed in the span of a few hours. The old rules no longer applied. And, at the center of that change stood humanity, no longer the newest and weakest member of the galactic community, but something far more dangerous. Something that hunted. 3 hours had passed since the initial engagement, and the Galactic Council was still watching in horrified fascination. What had started as a seemingly hopeless defense of New Terra had transformed into something unprecedented in galactic history. The humans weren't just winning, they were rewriting the fundamental rules of warfare. Commander Brix updated his tactical display for the dozenth time, hoping the numbers would somehow make more sense. They didn't. Counselor Thane, the Korthak fleet has lost 63% of its operational capacity. Not destroyed, disabled. The difference is significant. High Counselor Meridia's crystalline form had settled into a deep purple hue, indicating profound unease. "Explain the significance, Commander." "Destroyed ships become debris. Disabled ships become messages," Brix replied grimly. "The humans are creating a floating graveyard of crippled vessels. Every Korthak ship that survives will carry the story of what happened here back to their empire." Ambassador Zektar was monitoring communications intercepts from the battle zone. His breathing apparatus wheezed more rapidly as stress affected his respiratory system. The psychological impact is already spreading beyond this engagement. "We're picking up emergency broadcasts from Korthak outposts across 3 sectors. They're requesting reinforcements and issuing warnings about human capabilities." "Warnings about what, specifically?" Counselor Yava asked, though her feathered crest indicated she wasn't sure she wanted to hear the answer. Zektar consulted his translation matrix. The Korthak commanders are using words that don't translate well into civilized languages. The closest equivalents would be apex stalkers or void demons. They're describing human tactical behavior as unnatural and impossible to predict. Sarah-chan remained focused on the tactical display, but her expression suggested she was listening to every word. Commander Brix, what's the current status of Korthak fleet morale? Brix checked his readings reluctantly. It's unprecedented. We're seeing mass psychological breakdown across multiple ships. Korthak warriors are known for their aggression and fearlessness, but the intercepted communications indicate widespread panic. Panic about what? Pressed High Counselor Meridia. About the humans' methods, Sarah answered before Brix could respond. Your species have been fighting according to honorable conventions for so long that you've forgotten what warfare actually is. The Korthak are raiders and killers, but even they follow certain patterns. They expect their enemies to respond in predictable ways. On the main display, a perfect example of Sarah's point was unfolding. A group of Korthak raiders had attempted to use a classical pincer movement against what appeared to be a lone human destroyer. It was a textbook maneuver that had worked against countless opponents over the centuries. The human ship's response defied all tactical logic. Instead of attempting to escape the pincer or calling for support, it accelerated directly toward the center of the Korthak formation. The move was so unexpected that the Korthak ships hesitated for a crucial few seconds. In those seconds, the human destroyer deployed a weapon system that none of the Council's sensors had detected during previous scans. The ship's hull suddenly sprouted dozens of small launch tubes, and a cloud of what looked like metallic insects swarmed toward the Korthak vessels. What are those projectiles? Thane asked, his 6 eyes straining to focus on the tactical display. Adaptive nanobots, Sarah replied matter-of-factly. They analyze enemy ship systems in real time and then reconfigure themselves to exploit specific vulnerabilities. The Council watched in stunned silence as the nanobots attached themselves to the Korthak ships and began their work. Instead of explosive damage or energy discharges, the Korthak vessels simply began to malfunction. Weapon systems turned on each other. Life support systems started working at random intervals. Navigation computers began feeding false data to their operators. This is technological warfare at a level we've never seen, whispered Counselor Yava. How did humans develop such sophisticated systems? They've only been spacefaring for a few centuries. You're thinking about it wrong, Sarah said. We didn't develop these systems for space warfare. We developed them because on Earth, survival meant adapting to every possible threat. Our military technology isn't built around honorable combat between equals. It's built around winning against superior forces by any means necessary. The truth of her words was becoming increasingly apparent. Each human tactical innovation revealed deeper layers of thinking that the Council found deeply disturbing. The humans didn't just have advanced weapons, they had fundamentally different approaches to problem solving. A new development on the tactical display drew everyone's attention. The Korthak fleet commander, war leader Grexhan, had apparently decided that conventional tactics were useless against the humans. His massive command ship, a fortress-class dreadnought that dwarfed anything in the human fleet, was charging directly toward New Terra. He's going for a suicide run, Commander Brix observed. If he can reach the colony, he can destroy it even if he loses his ship in the process. The mathematics were simple and terrifying. The Korthak command ship had enough firepower to sterilize the planet's surface within minutes. Even if the humans destroyed it, the ship's momentum would carry its weapons within range of the defenseless colony. Surely the humans will have to sacrifice multiple ships to stop that dreadnought, Zektar said. This is their moment of truth. Sarah's expression didn't change, but something in her posture suggested confidence rather than concern. Watch and learn. A single human ship moved to intercept the charging dreadnought. It was a vessel the Council had barely noticed before, a modified research ship that appeared to have minimal weapons and virtually no armor. By every rational calculation, the encounter would last seconds and end with the complete destruction of the human vessel. Instead, something impossible happened. The human research ship didn't fire weapons or attempt to ram the dreadnought. Instead, it positioned itself directly in the larger ship's path and, then, seemed to simply disappear. Sensor malfunction? Thane suggested hopefully. No malfunction, Sarah replied. Stealth technology. But not the kind you're familiar with. The dreadnought continued its charge toward New Terra, but something was wrong. The ship's course began to drift slightly, then, more dramatically. Its engines flickered and stammered. Warning lights began flashing across its hull. What's happening to it? High Counselor Meridia demanded. The research ship didn't disappear, Sarah explained. It cloaked itself and attached to the dreadnought's hull. Right now, a human engineering team is inside that ship, systematically taking control of its systems. The concept was so audacious that the council members struggled to process it. Boarding actions were common enough in galactic warfare, but they involved breaching hulls and fighting through corridors. The idea of a ship designed specifically for covert infiltration was beyond their experience. How is that possible? Commander Brix asked. Korthak security systems are among the most advanced in the galaxy. Security systems are designed to keep out enemies who follow conventional approaches, Sarah pointed out. Human infiltration technology is built around the assumption that any system can be bypassed if you understand how it works. As if to demonstrate her point, the Korthak dreadnought suddenly began firing on its own escort ships. The massive vessel's weapons systems had been completely compromised, turning one of the most powerful ships in the galaxy into a liability for its own fleet. Magnificent, breathed Zektar, though his tone suggested horror rather than admiration. They've turned the enemy's greatest strength against them. It gets better, Sarah said with that same disturbing smile. Or worse, depending on your perspective. The dreadnought's engine suddenly flared to maximum power, but instead of continuing toward New Terra, the ship began an erratic spiral that would take it directly into a group of Korthak support vessels. War leader Grexon's own ship had become a guided missile aimed at his own fleet. The psychological impact of this tactic will be enormous, Thane observed grimly. Every Korthak ship commander will now have to wonder if their own vessel might be turned against them. That's the idea, Sarah confirmed. Humans learned long ago that the most effective weapon against any enemy is doubt. Make them question everything they think they know, and they defeat themselves. The battle's momentum had shifted so dramatically that the Korthak fleet was no longer capable of coordinated resistance. Ships that had started the engagement in perfect formation were now scattered across the system, many of them firing at shadows or fleeing from threats that might not even exist. But the humans weren't finished. A new type of human vessel appeared on the tactical display, ships that the Council's sensors couldn't quite classify. They were too large to be fighters but too small to be considered capital ships. More importantly, they moved in ways that defied conventional physics. Those ships are violating several laws of motion, Commander Brix noted with scientific precision. Their acceleration curves are impossible. Impossible according to your understanding of physics, Sarah corrected. Humans have been experimenting with gravity manipulation for decades. We just never mentioned it because we weren't sure how other species would react to the knowledge. The implications struck the Council like a physical blow. If humans had mastered gravitational control, it meant their technological capabilities were far beyond what they had revealed during their integration into galactic society. It also meant that every assumption about human limitations was potentially wrong. The new human vessels demonstrated their capabilities by performing maneuvers that should have been fatal to any crew. They stopped instantly from maximum acceleration, changed direction without turning, and passed through gravitational fields that should have torn them apart. How long have you had this technology? High Counselor Meridia asked quietly. Long enough to know how to use it effectively, Sarah replied. But this is the first time we've had reason to reveal it publicly. You've been hiding your true capabilities from the Council? Zektar's breathing apparatus was working overtime now. We've been cautious, Sarah said. When you're the newest member of a galactic community, it's usually wise to observe and learn before showing your full hand. Today seemed like an appropriate time to be more open about what humanity can do. On the tactical display, the remaining Korthak ships were attempting to form some kind of defensive formation, but their efforts were being systematically dismantled by human forces that seemed to appear and disappear at will. The gravity-manipulating vessels were particularly effective, creating localized distortions that trapped enemy ships in invisible snares. This isn't warfare, Counselor Yava said quietly. This is something else entirely. It's problem-solving, Sarah replied. The Korthak Empire has been a problem for this galaxy for 500 years. They've enslaved millions of beings, destroyed countless civilizations, and spread fear across dozens of sectors. Today, that problem is being solved. The clinical nature of her statement was perhaps more chilling than any threat could have been. The humans weren't fighting out of anger or hatred. They were eliminating a threat with the same methodical efficiency they might use to debug a computer program or repair a damaged system. As the second phase of the engagement drew to a close, the tactical situation was clear. The Korthak invasion force had been neutralized not through superior firepower or numbers, but through superior thinking. Human forces had demonstrated technological capabilities that rendered traditional warfare obsolete. But, perhaps more importantly, they had demonstrated a mindset that was fundamentally alien to civilized galactic society. They thought like predators, planned like strategists, and fought like nothing the galaxy had ever seen. The council members sat in their chambers, watching the real-time feed and trying to process what they had witnessed. The balance of power in the galaxy had shifted in a matter of hours, and they were only beginning to understand what that meant. Ambassador Sarah Chen remained at her position, her attention focused on the ongoing operation. Around her, representatives of the galaxy's most advanced civilizations struggled with the realization that they might no longer be the dominant species in their own community. The humans had revealed themselves, and the galaxy would never be the same. The Galactic Council chambers had become a pressure cooker of tension and disbelief. 6 hours into what should have been a routine Korthak raid, the fundamental assumptions underlying galactic civilization were crumbling in real time. The tactical display now showed something that military historians would later describe as less a battle and more a systematic dismantling of an entire war machine. War leader Grexhan's Fortress-class dreadnought hung motionless in space, its weapon systems firing randomly at empty coordinates while its engines pushed it in lazy circles. The human infiltration team had not only taken control of the ship's primary systems but had apparently reprogrammed its artificial intelligence to carry out increasingly erratic behaviors. Status report, High Counselor Meridia requested, though her crystalline form had shifted to a color that indicated she was dreading the answer. Commander Brix consulted his displays with the methodical precision of someone hoping that mathematics might somehow make the situation less disturbing. The Korthak fleet has suffered an effective loss rate of 87%. Of their original 10,000 ships, only 1,300 remain operational. However, the term operational may be optimistic. Explain, Zektar wheezed, his breathing apparatus struggling to keep pace with his stress levels. Many of the remaining ships are experiencing what can only be described as cascading system failures, Brix continued. Their crews are reporting equipment malfunctions, navigation errors, and communication disruptions that appear to be spreading from ship to ship like a virus. Sarah Chen spoke without turning from the tactical display. Information warfare. Once you compromise one node in a network, you can use it to access other nodes. Korthak ships communicate with each other constantly during combat operations. We're simply using those communication channels for our own purposes. The implications of her casual statement sent ripples of alarm through the assembled representatives. The idea that an enemy could turn a fleet's own communication systems against them represented a level of technological sophistication that most species had never imagined. You're describing the systematic corruption of an entire naval force, Counselor Yava observed, her feathered crest fully extended in distress. How is such a thing even possible? Human-computer technology developed under unique pressures, Sarah replied. On Earth, we faced constant threats from malicious actors who were always trying to compromise our systems. Our defensive technologies evolved to be incredibly robust, but our offensive capabilities evolved to be even more sophisticated. As if to demonstrate her point, the tactical display suddenly showed a new development. A squadron of Korthak destroyers that had been retreating toward the edge of the system suddenly changed course and began attacking their own support ships. The vessels moved in perfect coordination, but they were clearly no longer under the control of their original crews. Remote override, Thane observed with growing horror. The humans have taken direct control of enemy vessels. Not all of them, Sarah corrected. That would be inefficient. We've compromised their command and control systems, then fed them false data about the location and identity of friendly and enemy forces. Those ships think they're attacking human vessels. The clinical precision of the explanation was somehow more terrifying than any display of raw destructive power. The humans weren't just defeating the Korthak, they were making them complicit in their own destruction. War leader Grexhan's voice suddenly crackled over the communication systems, broadcast on all frequencies. The universal translator struggled with the mixture of Korthak military terminology and what appeared to be expressions of existential terror. Attention all vessels. The war leader's voice carried a tremor that none of the council members had ever heard from a Korthak commander. The demons have taken my ship. They speak to me through my own systems. They show me visions of what they will do to our empire. The transmission cut to static, then resumed with a different voice, human, calm, and speaking in perfect Korthak dialect. This is Captain Martinez of the Earth vessel Persistence. War leader Grexhan is unharmed and will remain so as long as he cooperates with our requirements. All Korthak vessels are ordered to stand down immediately and prepare for inspection. Any ship that attempts to flee or continues hostile actions will be disabled and boarded. The casual tone of the human captain was perhaps more unsettling than any threat could have been. He was speaking to the commander of a massive invasion force as if he were directing traffic. How many humans are actually involved in this operation? Zektar asked quietly. Sarah considered the question for a moment. The new Terra Defense Force consists of approximately 1,200 ships with crews totaling roughly 50,000 personnel. 50,000 humans are defeating a Korthak invasion force of over 300,000 warriors? Commander Brix's voice carried a note of disbelief that he couldn't suppress. Korthak warriors are trained to fight according to established patterns, Sarah replied. They're very good at what they do, but what they do is predictable. Humans don't fight according to patterns. We fight according to circumstances. The truth of her statement was becoming increasingly apparent as the battle continued to unfold. Human forces were demonstrating a level of tactical flexibility that seemed to border on precognition. They anticipated Korthak responses before the Korthak commanders had even made their decisions. A new alarm sounded in the council chambers as sensors detected massive gravitational distortions throughout the new Terra system. The readings were so extreme that several council members initially suspected equipment malfunction. What's causing those gravity fluctuations? High Counselor Meridia demanded. The humans are reshaping the local spacetime environment, Thane reported, his voice tight with scientific fascination and terror. They're using controlled gravitational fields to create tactical advantages. On the tactical display, the evidence of human gravitational manipulation was becoming impossible to ignore. Asteroids were being redirected from their natural orbits to create obstacles for Korthak ships. More dramatically, the humans appeared to be creating artificial gravity wells that could trap enemy vessels or accelerate friendly ships to incredible velocities. This represents a complete revolution in space warfare, Commander Brix observed grimly. Traditional tactical doctrine assumes that the battlefield environment is static. If one side can manipulate the fundamental physics of the engagement zone, all existing military theory becomes obsolete. That's the idea, Sarah confirmed. Human military philosophy has always been based on the principle that the enemy gets a vote in how the battle unfolds. So we prepare for the possibility that every assumption might be wrong and every plan might fail. The psychological impact of the human tactics was becoming as important as their physical effectiveness. Across the Korthak fleet, ship after ship was reporting the same phenomena: equipment failures, navigation errors, and communication problems that seemed to spread like a contagion. Worse, the failures were often accompanied by human messages that demonstrated intimate knowledge of Korthak ship layouts, crew compositions, and even personal information about individual warriors. How do they know so much about Korthak internal systems? Counselor Yava asked. This level of intelligence penetration should have taken years to develop. Sarah's expression suggested that she was deciding how much to reveal. The Korthak Empire has been raiding and enslaving populations for centuries. Many of those populations included individuals with advanced technical knowledge. Some of those individuals eventually found their way to Earth. The implications hung in the air like a toxic cloud. The humans hadn't just been observing galactic affairs passively, they had been actively gathering intelligence from refugees and survivors of Korthak attacks. Every raid, every act of slavery, every atrocity had potentially provided Earth with more information about their enemies. You've been preparing for this confrontation since before you joined the council, Zektar realized. We've been preparing for the possibility that we might need to defend ourselves or our allies, Sarah corrected. The Korthak weren't specifically targeted until they made the decision to attack New Terra. War leader Grexhan's voice returned to the communication channels, but his tone had changed dramatically. The arrogance and aggression that had characterized his initial demands had been replaced by something approaching desperation. "Human commanders, I request parley under the galactic conventions of warfare. The Korthak Empire is prepared to negotiate terms for the withdrawal of our forces." Captain Martinez's response was immediate and delivered with the same calm professionalism he had shown throughout the engagement. War leader, the Korthak Empire forfeited any claim to civilized treatment when it chose to engage in slavery, piracy, and genocide. However, we are prepared to accept your unconditional surrender. Unconditional surrender? Grexhan's voice cracked with disbelief. The Korthak Empire has never surrendered to anyone. There's a first time for everything, Martinez replied simply. The council members exchanged glances laden with meaning. In all of galactic history, no major power had the aftermath of the Korthak surrender created a silence in the galactic council chambers that felt heavier than the vacuum of space itself. For the first time in recorded galactic history, an entire invasion fleet had capitulated without a single planet being destroyed or a single population center being evacuated. The implications were staggering, but what happened next would prove even more transformative. High Counselor Meridia's crystalline form had cycled through so many color changes that she appeared to be flickering like a broken hologram. Ambassador Chen, we need to discuss the immediate ramifications of what has occurred here. The Korthak Empire extends across dozens of star systems. Their surrender in this engagement doesn't necessarily mean the end of their civilization. Sarah Chen finally turned away from the tactical display to face the council directly. Her expression was calm, but there was something in her eyes that suggested the real demonstration was only beginning. High Counselor, you're correct that this engagement only involved a single Korthak fleet. However, you're mistaken about the scope of today's operations. Before anyone could ask what she meant, the main holographic display shifted to show a three-dimensional map of local galactic space. Red indicators marked the locations of major Korthak installations across 17 star systems. As the council watched, those red indicators began turning blue one by one. What are we looking at? Zektar demanded, his breathing apparatus working overtime. Simultaneous operations across all major Korthak strongholds, Sarah replied matter-of-factly. The new Terra engagement was never intended to be an isolated action. It was the opening move in a comprehensive campaign to neutralize the entire Korthak threat. The council members stared at the display in stunned disbelief. The logistics of coordinating simultaneous military actions across 17 star systems would challenge the resources of the entire galactic community. The idea that humans had planned and executed such an operation without any advance warning to the council was beyond their comprehension. Impossible, breathed Counselor Yava. The coordination requirements alone would be staggering. The communication delays across interstellar distances mean that real-time coordination is mathematically impossible. Impossible using conventional faster-than-light communication, Sarah agreed. However, human technology has developed certain capabilities that we haven't shared with the galactic community. Commander Brix was frantically checking his sensor arrays, trying to confirm what the display was showing. I'm reading massive energy signatures at every indicated location. Multiple fleets, each comparable in size to what we saw at New Terra. How did you deploy so many ships without being detected? Stealth technology, Sarah explained. Combined with what you might call unconventional deployment methods. Human ships have been in position around major Korthak installations for weeks. The revelation hit the council like a series of hammer blows. The humans hadn't just responded to a Korthak attack, they had planned a preemptive strike that was now unfolding across a significant portion of the galaxy. More troubling still, they had done so without detection by any council intelligence services. This is an act of war against a sovereign empire, High Counselor Meridia protested, though her tone suggested she was grasping for familiar legal frameworks in a situation that had moved far beyond conventional diplomacy. The Korthak Empire forfeited any claim to sovereignty when they chose to operate as pirates and slavers, Sarah replied coldly. According to galactic law, any organization that engages in systematic violations of sentient rights loses protection under interstellar conventions. Thane was studying the tactical display with growing alarm. The scale of these operations suggests massive resource deployment. How many ships are humans capable of fielding? More than enough, was Sarah's unhelpfully vague response. The display updated to show real-time feeds from the various Korthak strongholds under attack. The pattern was consistent across all locations. Human forces appeared without warning, systematically neutralized defensive systems, and began broadcasting surrender ultimatums in perfect Korthak dialect. But there were differences in the human approach at each location that revealed sophisticated intelligence and planning. At the slave processing facility on Korthak Prime, human forces had surrounded the entire installation with gravity snares that prevented any ship from escaping, while specialized rescue vessels evacuated thousands of captured beings from various species. At the weapons manufacturing complex on Zirion, human teams had infiltrated the facility and were systematically downloading technical specifications while their engineers disabled production capabilities. They're not just defeating the Korthak, Commander Brix observed with scientific detachment. They're dismantling their entire civilization piece by piece. We're liberating enslaved populations and eliminating weapons of mass destruction, Sarah corrected. The Korthak people themselves will survive this process, but their military-industrial complex will not. The clinical precision of the operation was perhaps more disturbing than raw destruction would have been. The humans were demonstrating a level of strategic planning that suggested they had been studying Korthak society for years, identifying every critical vulnerability and planning specific responses to each potential challenge. War leader Grexhan's voice crackled over the communication system again, but this time he was speaking to someone other than the human commanders at New Terra. Emperor Vashtar, the humans have struck everywhere at once. 17 systems under simultaneous attack. Our defenses are useless against their weapons. They know everything about our installations, our codes, our procedures. Request immediate evacuation. The response from the Korthak Emperor was immediate and filled with disbelief. Grexhan, you speak madness. No force in the galaxy could coordinate attacks across 17 systems simultaneously. Respectfully, Your Imperial Majesty, a new voice interjected, speaking in fluent Korthak with what sounded like amusement. We can indeed coordinate such operations. This is Admiral Chen of the Earth Fleet. Emperor Vashtar, you are hereby ordered to surrender yourself and your government to galactic justice. Comply within 1 standard hour or face the consequences. The casual tone of the human admiral when addressing the supreme leader of one of the galaxy's most feared empires sent shock waves through the council chambers. In all of recorded history, no one had ever spoken to a Korthak emperor with such casual authority. Who dares speak to the emperor of the Korthak in such terms? Vashtar's voice carried centuries of imperial arrogance. Someone who currently has your palace surrounded and your fleet disabled, Admiral Chen replied with unperturbable calm. Your Imperial Majesty, I have detailed recordings of war crimes committed under your direct orders. I have documentation of slave trading operations, genocide campaigns, and systematic violations of galactic law spanning 3 centuries. Surrender now, and you will receive a fair trial. Continue resistance, and you will be taken by force. The council members listened to this exchange with growing amazement. The humans weren't just defeating the Korthak militarily, they were dismantling the psychological foundations of their empire. The idea that anyone could speak to the emperor with such casual dismissal was shattering fundamental assumptions about power and authority that had governed galactic relations for millennia. How do you have such detailed records? Zektar asked Sarah quietly. Human intelligence operations have been documenting Korthak activities for decades, Sarah replied. Every raid, every act of piracy, every slave auction has been recorded and analyzed. We have evidence that will support war crimes prosecutions for over 14,000 individual Korthak officers and officials. The scope of human intelligence penetration was staggering. They had apparently been building legal cases against the entire Korthak leadership structure while simultaneously gathering the tactical intelligence necessary to defeat their military forces. Emperor Vashtar's response came after a long pause, and, when he spoke, his voice had lost much of its imperial authority. Admiral Chen, the Korthak Empire has ruled this sector for 500 years. Our military might is legendary throughout the galaxy. How do you propose to enforce your demands? Your Imperial Majesty, your legendary military might has been neutralized across 17 star systems in the past 6 hours, Admiral Chen replied with devastating simplicity. Your palace guard has been disarmed, your command centers have been occupied, and your personal escape routes have been blocked. You have no military options remaining. As if to emphasize the Admiral's point, the main display showed real-time footage from the Korthak Imperial Palace. Human soldiers in advanced combat armor were calmly walking through corridors that should have been protected by multiple layers of security. They moved with the confidence of people who knew exactly where they were going and what they would find when they got there. This level of intelligence penetration, Thane observed grimly, it suggests that human operations have been ongoing for years, possibly decades. Human strategic planning operates on generational timescales, Sarah confirmed. When we identified the Korthak as a potential threat to galactic stability, we began developing comprehensive response options. Today's operations represent the culmination of 30 years of preparation. The revelation that humans had been secretly preparing for this confrontation for 3 decades added another layer of complexity to the situation. Every assumption about human capabilities and intentions would need to be re-evaluated in light of this demonstration of long-term strategic thinking. Emperor Vashtar's final transmission was barely audible, the words of a leader watching his entire civilization crumble around him. The Korthak Empire, surrenders to galactic justice. The words hung in the air like a death knell. The Korthak Empire, which had terrorized the galaxy for 5 centuries, had just ceased to exist as a military and political entity. More than that, they had surrendered not to a coalition of galactic powers, but to a single species that most council members had considered a minor regional player just hours earlier. What happens now? High Counselor Meridia asked, though her tone suggested she was no longer sure she wanted to hear the answer. Now we begin the process of justice and reconstruction, Sarah replied. Korthak war criminals will face prosecution according to galactic law. Enslaved populations will be liberated and provided with support for reintegration into galactic society. Former Korthak territories will be placed under temporary galactic administration until stable local governments can be established. The comprehensive nature of the human post-conflict plan was as impressive as their military capabilities had been. They had apparently spent as much time planning for the aftermath of victory as they had for the victory itself. And the Korthak people themselves? Counselor Yava asked quietly. Will be given opportunities to build a new society based on peaceful cooperation rather than predation, Sarah answered. Human experience suggests that most individuals can adapt to different social systems when given proper incentives and support. As the 4th phase of what would be remembered as the Korthak liberation drew to a close, the Galactic Council found itself confronting a completely transformed political landscape. The humans had not only neutralized the galaxy's most persistent threat but had done so while demonstrating capabilities that called into question every assumption about technological and strategic limitations. More importantly, they had revealed themselves to be far more than the newest and weakest members of the galactic community. They were strategic planners operating on timescales that span decades, intelligence gatherers with penetration capabilities that no other species had suspected, and military commanders with technological advantages that rendered traditional warfare obsolete. The balance of power in the galaxy had not just shifted, it had been completely revolutionized in the span of a single day. Ambassador Sarah Chen stood calmly at her position, monitoring the ongoing operations with the satisfaction of someone watching a carefully laid plan reach its successful conclusion. Around her, the representatives of 26 advanced civilizations struggled with the realization that they were witnessing the emergence of a new galactic order. The age of human dominance had begun, and the galaxy would never be the same. 7 days had passed since the fall of the Korthak Empire, and the Galactic Council was still trying to process the magnitude of what they had witnessed. The emergency session had been called to address what High Counselor Meridia diplomatically termed recent developments in galactic security arrangements, though everyone present knew they were really discussing the emergence of humanity as the galaxy's dominant military power. The main holographic display now showed a very different map of local space. Where once red indicators had marked Korthak strongholds, green symbols now represented human peacekeeping forces. More disturbing to many council members, similar green indicators were appearing throughout the galaxy as human ships revealed themselves in star systems where their presence had never been suspected. Ambassador Sarah Chen stood at the center of the chamber, no longer in the observer section but at the primary speaker's podium. The symbolism was not lost on anyone present. In the span of a week, humanity had gone from being the newest council member to being the species that everyone else needed to understand and accommodate. The preliminary reports from the liberated territories are encouraging, Sarah began, her voice carrying the same calm authority that had characterized her statements during the crisis. Over 2 million enslaved beings have been freed from Korthak facilities. Medical teams are providing treatment for those who suffered abuse, while social workers are helping coordinate reunion efforts with families and homeworlds. The humanitarian aspect of the human operation had proven as impressive as their military capabilities. Within hours of the Korthak surrender, human relief ships had appeared at every liberated facility with medical supplies, food, and personnel trained in dealing with trauma victims from dozens of different species. Commander Brix consulted his data pad with the methodical precision he had maintained throughout the crisis. Ambassador Chen, our logistics specialists are struggling to understand how humans managed to position relief supplies so quickly. The coordination required for such an operation should have taken months to arrange. Human emergency response protocols are designed around the assumption that disasters can happen without warning, Sarah replied. We maintain strategic reserves of medical supplies, food, and emergency equipment throughout our sphere of influence. When the need arose, we simply redirected existing resources. Zektar's breathing apparatus wheezed softly as he processed this information. Ambassador, you speak of your sphere of influence as if it encompasses significant portions of galactic space. How extensive is human presence in regions that we considered unoccupied or neutral? Sarah's expression suggested she had been expecting this question. Counselor Zektar, human exploration and settlement efforts have been ongoing for several decades. We currently maintain research stations, communication relays, and defensive installations in approximately 40% of charted galactic space. The revelation hit the Council like a physical blow. 40% of the galaxy under human influence meant that humanity had established a presence comparable to all the major Council species combined. More importantly, they had done so without triggering any significant attention from galactic intelligence services. How is such expansion possible without detection? High Counselor Meridia asked, her crystalline form cycling through colors that indicated profound distress. Human technology emphasizes stealth and minimal environmental impact, Sarah explained. Our installations are designed to be undetectable unless you know exactly what to look for. We've learned that it's often easier to ask forgiveness than permission when it comes to frontier expansion. The casual admission that humans had been secretly colonizing vast regions of space added another layer to the growing realization that everything the Council thought they knew about humanity was incorrect. The species they had welcomed as junior partners were apparently operating on a scale that dwarfed most established civilizations. Counselor Yava's feathered crest was fully extended in what other species had learned to recognize as extreme agitation. Ambassador Chen, the implications of what you're describing are staggering. Humanity has essentially built a parallel galactic civilization without informing the Council. Why? Because the Council's approach to galactic security has been inadequate, Sarah replied bluntly. For centuries, you've known about threats like the Korthak Empire but chosen to treat them as manageable problems rather than addressing them directly. Meanwhile, millions of innocent beings suffered and died because no one was willing to take decisive action. The accusation hung in the air like an indictment. Every Council member knew it was true, but hearing it stated so directly forced them to confront the moral failures that had characterized galactic governance for generations. The Council operates according to established diplomatic protocols, High Counselor Meridia protested weakly. We cannot simply decide to overthrow governments we disapprove of. Why not? Sarah asked simply. If a government is engaged in systematic genocide and slavery, what moral authority protects it from intervention? The Korthak Empire had no legitimacy beyond force, and, when that force was removed, it collapsed completely. The philosophical challenge struck at the heart of galactic political theory. For millennia, the Council had operated on principles of sovereignty and non-interference, even when those principles protected the most heinous regimes. The human approach suggested a radically different set of priorities. Thane was studying intelligence reports that had been trickling in from across the galaxy. Ambassador, our preliminary assessments suggest that human military capabilities far exceed what was demonstrated during the Korthak operation. What we witnessed was only a fraction of your actual strength. Correct, Sarah confirmed without elaboration. How large is the human military? Commander Brix asked directly. Large enough, Sarah replied with that same maddening vagueness that had characterized many of her answers over the past week. The refusal to provide specific numbers was itself a form of psychological warfare. By demonstrating overwhelming capability while refusing to reveal its full extent, humanity was forcing other species to assume the worst-case scenario when making strategic calculations. Emperor Vashtar's voice suddenly interrupted the proceedings as he was brought into the council chambers under heavy guard. The former ruler of the Korthak Empire looked nothing like the imperious figure who had terrorized the galaxy for decades. His scales had lost their luster, his posture was stooped with defeat, and his eyes held the hollow look of someone whose entire world had collapsed. Honored counselors, he began, his voice barely above a whisper, I come before you to provide testimony about human capabilities and to warn you about what you are truly dealing with. The presence of the fallen emperor added a surreal element to the proceedings. This was the being who had been considered one of the most dangerous individuals in the galaxy just days earlier, and now he stood as a broken witness to human power. Speak, Vashtar, High Counselor Meridia commanded, though her tone lacked its usual authority. The humans knew everything, the former emperor said slowly. Every secret base, every hidden facility, every escape route I had planned over centuries of rule. They had infiltrated not just our military systems but our entire society. My own bodyguards had been compromised. My personal communication devices were under human control. They could have eliminated me at any time over the past several years. The implications of his testimony were chilling. If humans had achieved such complete penetration of the Korthak Empire, what did that suggest about their intelligence capabilities regarding other galactic governments? Why didn't they act sooner? Zektar asked quietly. Because they were waiting, Vashtar replied with the certainty of someone who had been thoroughly debriefed by human intelligence officers. They wanted to gather complete evidence of our crimes. They wanted to understand our entire organizational structure. And they wanted to be certain that when they acted, the Korthak Empire would never be able to reconstitute itself. Saracen listened to this testimony with an expression that revealed nothing, but her silence was more telling than any words could have been. The former emperor's account was painting a picture of human strategic thinking that operated on timescales and, with patience that other species found almost incomprehensible. There is something else, Vashtar continued, his voice dropping even lower. The humans have been in contact with other organizations that the Council considers threats to galactic stability. They know about the Shadow Cartel's slave networks. They have infiltrated the hegemony's weapons development programs. They have agents embedded in dozens of criminal and terrorist organizations throughout the galaxy. The revelation that human intelligence operations extended far beyond the Korthak Empire sent waves of alarm through the assembled representatives. Every major power in the galaxy was now forced to wonder what secrets humans might possess about their own activities. Ambassador Chen, High Counselor Meridia said carefully, is Emperor Vashtar's testimony accurate? Substantially accurate, Sarah confirmed. Human intelligence services have been documenting threats to galactic stability for decades. The Korthak Empire was simply the most immediate and pressing of those threats. What other threats are you preparing to address? Commander Brix asked, though his tone suggested he wasn't sure he wanted to hear the answer. That depends on the choices made by the organizations in question, Sarah replied diplomatically. Humanity has no interest in conquest or domination. We do have a very strong interest in eliminating threats to innocent populations. The distinction was important but also ominous. By framing their actions as protective rather than aggressive, humans were claiming moral authority that was difficult to challenge while simultaneously threatening anyone who might oppose them. What happens now? Counselor Yava asked. The galaxy has been fundamentally changed by recent events. The old balance of power no longer exists. How do we move forward? Sarah's expression softened slightly, the first time she had shown anything approaching warmth since the crisis began. Counselor, humanity didn't seek the role of galactic protector. We would have been perfectly content to develop our own worlds and trade peacefully with our neighbors. But, when innocent beings are suffering and established authorities refuse to act, we will not stand by and watch. You're describing a fundamental change in how galactic affairs are managed, High Counselor Meridia observed. I'm describing accountability, Sarah corrected. For too long, the galaxy has operated according to the principle that might makes right, as long as the mighty were sufficiently polite about exercising their power. The Korthak Empire existed because no one was willing to pay the price to stop them. Other threats persist for the same reason. And, now humanity is willing to pay that price? Thane asked. Humanity is willing to solve problems that need solving, Sarah replied. Whether that requires diplomatic negotiation, economic pressure, or military intervention depends on the specific circumstances and the willingness of other parties to engage constructively. As the final session of what would later be called the Korthak Crisis drew to a close, the Galactic Council found itself facing a completely transformed political reality. Humanity had revealed itself as a species with capabilities that dwarfed those of established powers, strategic vision that operated on generational timescales, and moral principles that prioritized results over procedures. More importantly, they had demonstrated the will and ability to act on those principles regardless of established diplomatic conventions. The galaxy now had a species that considered itself responsible for protecting innocent beings throughout known space, and that possessed the power to enforce that responsibility. The Council will need time to process these developments and their implications for galactic governance, High Counselor Meridia said finally. We request that humanity provide us with detailed briefings on your capabilities and intentions so that we can adapt our policies accordingly. Of course, Sarah agreed readily. Humanity has always preferred cooperation to conflict. We're prepared to work with any organization that shares our commitment to protecting innocent life and promoting peaceful development. The offer sounded generous, but the subtext was clear. Cooperation was available to those who accepted human moral authority. Those who chose a different path would face the same fate as the Korthak Empire. As the council session ended and representatives began filing out of the chambers, the magnitude of the change became apparent. Humanity had not conquered the galaxy through force of arms, but they had fundamentally altered its power structure through a demonstration of capability and will that no other species could match. Ambassador Sarah Chen remained at the podium, calmly reviewing reports from human forces throughout the galaxy. Around her, the foundations of galactic civilization continued to shift as species and governments adapted to the new reality. The age of human protection had begun, and, for countless innocent beings throughout the galaxy, that represented the first real hope for justice they had known in centuries. For those who had prospered under the old system of comfortable inaction, it represented a challenge that would reshape their entire approach to galactic affairs. The Council had seen it all in real time, and the galaxy would never be the same.